The man you're looking at is about to die. There's nothing strange about that. He is, after all, a side character in a Friday the 13th film, the 5th Friday the 13th film in the franchise to be exact. In fact, depending on your criteria and the count you use, Demon is the 28th man to die in the first 5 films. What is strange is the way he dies. And with Friday the 13th: The New Beginning being mostly rejected by fans,
I got a bomb on me.
It might be time to talk about how Demon encapsulates the way the film somehow manages to hit every story beat of a Friday the 13th, and yet still finds a way to make a wild choice with it. I don't think it's all that controversial to say that Friday the 13th: A New Beginning is the most divisive of the Friday films. Jason Goes to Hell and Jason Takes Manhattan are more derided, but consistently so. I don't think, for example, there's a large contingent of the fandom waiting to reclaim the I'm on a boat movie.
I'm on a boat, motherfucker, take a look at me!
But I can't say the same for A New Beginning, and that even includes me. In the mid-aughts, when I was writing for a website that shall remain nameless, I called it barely a movie, and amateurish beyond all belief. And you know what? It is those things 40 years later. But something in me has changed, I think. I've gotten to that George Carlin phase where I'm enjoying watching the entropy of my childhood. Things a lot of my generation are precious about have fallen apart.
Bumblebee, stop lubricating the man.
That includes the way I view this franchise. Obviously, it stopped scaring me a long time ago. I can't remember the last time I was scared by a Friday the 13th film, but I think Terrence Trent D'Arby was still a thing. And in letting go of the idea that Friday the 13th: The New Beginning was a failed attempt at making a Friday the 13th film, and instead viewing it as an exercise in fanfiction by a bunch of people who were all in it for a check, a party, or a credit, I feel like I can look at it more fairly. This video contains spoilers, so consider watching the film first before you continue. And if you like what you see, click the like button, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to click the little bell to be notified for new videos. We might be getting a little granular on this one, even for horror fans, so it goes something like this. Friday the 13th: A New Beginning is the 5th film in a critically derided but commercially successful 1980s slasher series, Friday the 13th. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th films of the franchise followed Jason Voorhees, a hulking masked killer who murdered anyone who entered the woods near Crystal Lake. The film served as a potboiler, a film that you use to keep the lights on while you make your more prestigious films that are sometimes more financially risky. If you can make a movie for $2 million and get a nearly guaranteed return of $20 to $30 million, you can risk another Heaven's Gate. The cost to the studio's reputation was becoming too great by 1984, though. Taking a critical hit from Siskel and Ebert was one thing, but slasher movies were one of the many things that united the religious right, who hated the sex and violence, and the social left, that hated the exploitative aspects. Plus, the genre was already descending into parody creatively by the time Paramount decided to kill off the franchise with the final chapter. Special effects makeup guru Tom Savini was brought back to give Jason Voorhees his big send-off, which he did in grand fashion. The problem is, the final chapter made a ridiculous amount of money, and movie executives tend to convince themselves that they have a moral duty to support the jacuzzi and sports car industries, even if they do have to produce utter dreck to do it. That put 1985 Paramount in basically the same position Disney is with the Marvel Cinematic Universe post-Endgame. You've already said everything you needed to say creatively, but profit dictates that we continue to trot out this exercise of alluding to weighty issues about the human condition without actually exploring them, and also explosions and blue lights.
It's just been miss after miss after miss!
So Paramount assembled the Avengers before the ink had even dried on the movie tickets for Part 4, and rushed another film into pre-production. The problem, among many, is that the creative force behind the franchise, Frank Mancuso Jr., was burned out and wanted to focus on making the sequel to Chinatown. So one of the money men behind the original film, Phil Scuderi, stepped up to take over the nuts and bolts of production while Mancuso took a step back.
You know, creatively, this is really going to be sort of other people's stuff now.
That's where things get interesting because Mancuso was Hollywood through and through. His father, Frank Mancuso Sr., was the head of Paramount Pictures, so yes, Frank Jr. was a Nepo baby. But here's the thing about Nepo babies. They tend to know the family business better than outsiders. Phil Scuderi was just the owner of a theater chain who knew what he liked to see in a movie. That made this whole exercise like that episode of The Simpsons where Homer's brother lets him design a car.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Homer.
This, I think, is the linchpin to understanding how this film works. Scuderi at times seems aggressively anti-Hollywood, and his approach to making the film seemed to be cobbled together from a pastiche of other films he'd seen. The script was recycled from a discarded draft of an earlier movie by Martin Kitrosser, the writer of Friday the 13th Part 3, so they didn't have to do as much original content as they thought. Scuderi hired sleaze merchant Danny Steinman on the strength of seeing his work as director of Savage Streets.
I'm gonna fuck that bitch.
Most of the cast were not even told what movie they'd be working on until well into the casting process. The result is a film that acts as a pod person version of a Friday film. It's like something crawled inside a real Friday the 13th movie and is walking around in its skin. There's an uncanny valleyness to the proceedings. It's Jason, but it's not Jason. It's Tommy, but it's not Tommy. It's Crystal Lake, but it's not Crystal Lake. It's a Friday the 13th film that isn't. Cards on the Table, Friday the 13th of New Beginning is not a good film, even in comparison to the other not good films. Having read and watched Crystal Lake Memories, it seems like no one actually wanted to make this film outside Frank Mancuso Sr., and even he said it was more of a financial obligation than a passion project because fans just weren't getting tired of them. But the film that they made seems annoyed that there's a burgeoning fandom to contend with, one that won't just let the series die already. And ultimately it commits the cardinal sin of jettisoning the relationship with longtime fans in favor of trying to attract new viewers. I'm betting brand new people just jumping into the franchise and seeing this as their first film wouldn't think twice about it. It's the apotheosis of every stereotype they had about these films, after all.
What's the point? They're all the same. Some stupid killer stalking some big-breasted girl who can't act, who's always running up the stairs when she should be going out the front door. It's insulting.
If one were more cynical, they might think that Paramount assembled a team of losers so they could move the team from Cleveland to Miami, and Mancuso could just make the two Jakes in peace without anyone bothering him about Jason. Like I said, the film is not good. Nothing I'm going to argue here should be interpreted as, these were artisans working on another level that we can't possibly comprehend, and they wound up moving fast and breaking things. Instead, I think it's the lack of professionalism in the production that led to everyone obeying their own instincts individually.
Danny, you couldn't go to him. He just said, just do it. So for that moment, I said, okay, you're really on your own here.
Resulting in the cinematic version of one of those skits from Saturday Night Live that goes off the rails and somehow connects with the audience on a deeper level because of it.
Sir!
In this case, because the movie is wearing a Friday the 13th meat suit and skulking around the forest trying to fool everyone that it's a real movie, it subverts a lot of what made Friday connect with the audience. So, what kinds of things are off that make this film different? Well, the film plays with narrative continuity in ways that don't make sense in a conventional narrative. There's no reason, for example, to bring back Corey Feldman to shoot a prologue if you're just going to jump ahead 5 years. It just calls attention to the fact that these two look nothing alike, that Corey Feldman couldn't come back because he was doing the Goonies, and that this is only a movie, so none of it matters. Usually you try to hide the string on the UFO or the zipper on the creature's back, but not here. Second, almost out of necessity, due to these stringent guidelines from the Motion Picture Association of America, the censorship of many of the kills is apparent. But editor Bruce Green chose to hide the gore in such a way that, again, calls attention to the filmmaking. There are several moments where we just zoom in on the already edited film, so the violence is just out of frame. There are other ways to hide these cuts, but they chose the laziest one. Third, the film is pugnaciously horny.
Fuck you.
But not in a fun way that the earlier films were. Not in the, yeah, these are just a bunch of teens with hormones enjoying each other's company for the summer sort of way. No, this film shoves its tits in your face and slaps you upside the head with them. That's not a complaint, mind you, it's just an explanation of the vibe. It's like it hates you and it wants you to admit that you're a pervert instead of the previous films that gave you a sort of plausible deniability.
It's for jacking off, isn't it?
And that brings me to number 4, which is that everyone in this film is so friggin' angry. It's supposed to be a place of healing, and everyone is just so aggro with one another.
Beautiful. Sit there, I don't give a shit.
Would you shut the fuck up?
Leave me alone!
Fix it, man. Those cunts aren't gonna wait all night.
Crap my ass! You don't set a place for a dead person.
You big dildo. Eat your fucking slop. Who the fuck are you? What the fuck do you want?
Your ass is on the line here, Tucker. Are you getting that? You get me a goddamn live suspect.
Oh, my mom's gonna chop you up into itty-bitty pieces, my friend. Now you're gonna get it, bitch.
It's me. What is it? What is it?
Wait, why is the nurse upset? She doesn't even have any lines. Did Pam's near-death experience ruin her night or something? Is she upset because the hospital was desegregated? And of course, Demon's death is not the typical side character death for reasons I'll get into. But suffice it to say, this is a film that deals with sex and gender in very atypical ways for the horror genre. And since I use that specific combination of words, the heavens call forth. Carol Clover is undoubtedly one of the top names in academic horror study. Any serious study of slasher films is going to start with her groundbreaking book, Men, Women, and Chainsaws. While Siskel and Ebert were busy doxing actresses and railing against anyone who would debase themselves by watching a slasher film, Clover was taking a different approach. She met slasher films where they were, studying their antecedents in both exploitation and mainstream film, and looking at the genre's treatment of both men and women as a consequence of the genre's structure. Structure is one of the areas that Mancuso was adamant director Danny Steinman stick to.
Every 8-9 minutes, there should be a kill, or a jump, a big jump.
Friday the 13th movies are perhaps unsurprisingly highly regimented and structured. A cynic would even say formulaic.
There's a formula to it. A very simple formula.
At the beginning, we get a death to establish the stakes and recap to establish where we are in the story in the pre-VCR era. We get the opening credits. We meet our cast of characters. Most of them are young, most of them are attractive. One character gets a little more screen time and a little more depth. That's your final girl. Adult authoritarian figures get killed off first or are otherwise removed from the narrative through some other means. Characters get killed off by a shadowy figure until it's down to the final girl and the killer. The final girl runs away, finding all the dead bodies, which have usually been carefully arranged to scare her. Jason is nothing if not festive. The final girl has to use her resourcefulness and sometimes overcome her trauma in order to defeat the killer. In a Friday film, it usually means that a boy has to help her if she's up against Jason. Then there's a jump scare and roll credits. A New Beginning follows the formula structurally, but not narratively. What I mean by that is that all the elements of structure are there. They're just not built to the same material. It's like pouring vodka in your coffee cup. Structurally, that cup is meant to hold coffee, not vodka. And if you don't connect to that analogy, just imagine drinking coffee out of your vodka tumbler. So we get the structure of a Friday slasher film that, despite its origins, is not meant to hold a whodunit. The characters in the original did not find a dead body at the end of Act 1 and spend 5 minutes on a conversation about Kevin Bacon's whereabouts. The characters didn't even know they were in a murder movie until it was too late, and that's why having a brand new character show up at the last minute and exposition dump as the plot point at the end of Act 2 is so heavily criticized.
Jason was my son, and today is his birthday. What the fuck?
The closest comparison we have to something like that is Psycho 2, where the central conceit is whether or not Norman Bates is back off his rocker. It only came out a few years prior to this, and it just has to be an influence, especially on the ending. The difference between the two is that the characters and motivations in that film make sense before the fact, leading to what is called narrative coherence. This film has the opposite of coherence, mostly in time and space. The jump from Feldman to actor John Shepard as the same character, played in a totally different manner, is jarring. The 5-year gap between Part 1 and Part 2 kind of makes sense. It's just enough time that no one at the camp remembers it happening, but it's short enough time that it makes sense that the danger would still be there. But here, there is no explanation of time. Nothing for the audience to hang our hat on besides, well, he was 10 in the last movie and some indeterminate age between 18 and 33 in this one. We're not sure how far Pinehurst is away from Crystal Lake, but everything kind of looks the same. There are moments in the film where, because of the MPAA cuts and the rushed production, they had to put the film together in slapdash fashion, so Tommy seems to see into the future. But besides the temporal and spatial incongruence, there is the narrative incongruence. In this film, we have Tommy, whose main transgression is killing Jason at the end of the last one and going insane because of it. We don't see how insane, other than some Corey Feldman Manson lamps in the final shot of the previous film, and a tendency to go all John Cena when someone messes with him. But we do get a rundown of his medication history, and we know that he's got some impulse control issues. Tommy should be our main character, but he's also kinda not, because they made it an ensemble instead of his story. It's more like Sin City, where the city is the main character and everyone just sort of tangentially relates to one another by proxy. So we get greasers and hillbillies and Michael Jackson impersonators and one fucking ugly man.
That is one fucking ugly man that goes there.
And Tommy has to recede into the periphery because he has to be absent when all these people die. Which would be fine, except that no one at Pinehurst knows that there are murders happening. The only murder they know of is one they saw happen. So, where's the whodunit? Sheriff Tucker, world's greatest detective.
You talking to me, Sheriff? Huh? Oh, I thought you was talking to me.
No, Roy, it's okay.
Is presented as the only law enforcement on the case besides his Barney Fife-like deputy. And if we focused on him more as a character, his investigation, it would make sense. We do get a political struggle between him and the mayor in one of the most bizarrely out-of-place scenes you'll ever see in a movie. And I need to jump into this further because it's just so out there. First, let me preface this with Roger Ebert's comments on the Charles Bronson slasher film 10 to Midnight. One of Ebert's main complaints about the film, besides the prurient nature of the content,
It's for jacking off, isn't it?
was that most of the scenes that were in the movie didn't need to be there, and everything that would have been interesting to see in a movie happened off-screen. That's kind of how I feel about this scene. Or rather, I'm actually fine with this scene taking place because we need at least a little discussion about the fact that there is a killer on the loose, and we're supposed to be trying to figure out who that is.
You talking to me, Sheriff? Huh? Oh, I thought you was talking to me.
No, Roy, it's okay.
It's the way that this goes down that is the problem. First of all, why does the entire department look like it's taking a nap in the middle of a murder spree? Second, why is the sheriff playing this scene like he's Doc Holliday?
I'm your huckleberry.
What? Third, why does the mayor character act like he's going to kidnap Vanity and make her play his music videos?
I mean, this is a small town, man. And small towns are supposed to be safe.
But none of these acting choices compare with the content, because this is a surefire, absolute, candy corn softball of a way to make this film interesting. Earlier, the sheriff dropped off horny characters Tina and Eddie, and had a side conversation with Matt about Tommy Jarvis being taken in at Pinehurst.
Hey, I understand you got the Jarvis kid today.
Yeah, he arrived a little while ago.
So, he knows he's there. He knows that Tommy has a Jason fixation. He knows that Jason-style killings started up right as Tommy got there. Alright, this is an easy one. Let's fucking go.
I know who it is.
Good, good. Finally, a law enforcement officer in one of these films that is not completely useless.
It's Jason Voorhees.
No! No, it's Tommy! It's Tommy Jarvis, you country fried muppet. It's right there. I mean, can you imagine how much better the story would be if the sheriff was just fixated on Tommy being the killer because of his reputation? Can you imagine? A similar thing happens late in the movie as the sheriff is explaining Roy's master plan. See, Roy the paramedic is a background character that they keep zeroing in on for unexplained reasons, and at the end, the killer turns out to be Roy. An ending that makes no sense on the surface, so they have to do a quickie exposition scene where the sheriff speculates on Roy's motive to the audience. And if the sheriff had set up Tommy as a suspect earlier, it would make sense why he doesn't even think to look at Roy.
You talking to me, Sheriff? Huh? Oh, I thought you was talking to me.
And it would make sense as to why Roy chose the Jason motif to commit the murders. He also knew that Tommy was at Pinehurst and that he would catch the blame, allowing Roy to get revenge on Vic for killing his son Joey. Hey, ask me if Roy actually kills Vic, the one who set him off? He does not. But back to Carol Clover. Clover is largely credited for coining the term the final girl, giving rise to a set of characteristics that both guide and confine the way that women in the genre are written. Lesser known is that Clover also examined the gendering of victimhood in slasher films, which meant that she had to look at the ways in which both women and men died. It probably won't be surprising to find that, in Clover's survey of horror movie deaths, male characters tended to die quickly with little suffering.
Even in films in which males and females are killed in roughly even numbers, the lingering images are of the latter. The death of a male is nearly always swift. Even if the victim grasps what is happening to him, he has no time to react or register terror. He is dispatched and the camera moves on.
And looking at the first 27 kills in Friday the 13th, you can see that she has a point. Most of the men die without even realizing they're in danger. Others only realize it a moment or two before, and in many cases, deaths happen entirely off-screen. And that brings us back to A New Beginning and Demon. First, side characters being introduced after the main group solely to be killed moments later is nothing new. We got the sheriff in Part 2, the gang members in Part 3, and the hitchhiker in Part 4. And even in A New Beginning, we get the greaser characters and, for all intents and purposes, Billy and Lana. Most of these people get zero in the way of characterization. The hitchhiker in Part 4 doesn't even get any lines. But Demon gets a lot in the way of characterization. For one thing, he's alluded to half an hour before he actually appears.
Can I go see my brother? He'll be in town tomorrow.
We'll see.
Gramps' reaction tells us a lot about Demon without him even needing to appear. When we finally do meet Demon, it's like a charisma overload. In the Crystal Lake Memories documentary, the cast is consistent in saying that Steinman didn't give them much direction. He was more interested in breasts than character development.
I did my first nude scene for Danny.
Sorry,
So everyone just sort of went with their theater kid improv skills, yes-anding their way through scenes. It's why you get gems like this.
I got a bomb on me. I swear to you.
This ain't starting, man. Fucked up again, it ain't starting.
Ooh, baby, ooh, baby, ooh, baby, ooh, baby.
So Miguel Nunez showed up looking like werewolf number 3 from the Thriller video, and that's just him doing his thing. He just happens to be doing more with less. Demon is only in the film for about 6.5 minutes, but in those short minutes he winds up endearing himself to the audience and being one of the most memorable parts of the film that doesn't involve nipples. It looks like Gramps just doesn't like him because he leads a sort of bohemian lifestyle, tooling around in his van with his hot girlfriend, smoking joints and eating junk food. But like, dude, that's the dream. Throw in solving mysteries and you've got yourself a crudely animated 70s hit. But Demon does show a lot of genuine affection for Reggie, giving him a ring, teasing him with a beer, bonding with him over hot women. And when Reggie has to leave, Demon says,
You know, I miss him already.
Why aren't they making us like this one-off machete fodder character? The practical answer is that they needed to pad the runtime, of course, but they could have padded that with any old unlikable character that you can't wait to see die. Instead, I think this is a case where they failed upwards and accidentally really said something about the way men are killed. Let's look at another case study side by side for comparison. Ali, the lead biker from Part 3, played by Nick Savage, has about the same amount of screen time, although it's spread across the movie. He also has a certain kind of charisma that he displays in a short amount of time. But when it comes to his death, it seems appropriate, right? Like his death is in character. He's a big tough guy who appears to get beaten to death, only to pop up in the final reel, providing enough distraction for Chris to bury an axe in Jason's skull. Sure, Ali still dies for real, but it's a hero's death. The same is true for Paul in Part 2 and Rob in the final chapter. Now compare Demon's death. If there's a more undignified death in the franchise, I'd be hard-pressed to find it. He barely makes it to the outhouse in time to relieve himself from some rancid enchiladas. And I don't know that we're sure he made it, because there's a merciful elliptical cut in there. Anita starts shaking the outhouse to mess with him, and we see he's not exactly a profile in courage. He's spooked by the rattling and by the thought of a snake in the toilet. Of course, there is the famous, and let's face it, bizarre, ooh baby duet. But that's just one more endearing thing about Demon and Anita. Even when he calls her bitch, you can tell it's one of those moments where he can cross the line because you let some people cross the line. She gets to tease him while he shits, he gets to call her bitch. That's just part of being in an intimate relationship. At least in a Friday the 13th film. And when the violence does actually happen, Anita is killed off-screen with only a fleeting gulp that you can barely hear.
Baby, ooh, baby, ooh.
The killer rattles the outhouse again, and this time it lures Demon to open the door and find Anita's throat slit. It's the reverse of the usual formula. In most cases, the man dies first, leaving the woman unprotected, and the woman faces a prolonged, fearful death, often cowering.
We did 20 takes, and that was the best one.
In other words, Demon dies a woman's death. He's quivering, tears streaming down his cheeks, squealing for help. It's a death that more resembles Vicky's from Part 2 than any other. It's just not supposed to happen that way. And this is a thing most people will never think about. That's fine. But they'll feel it. It feels wrong somehow. The scene, the death, the movie just feels wrong. And that's the way most of this movie is. Demon's death is just emblematic of a film flying by the seat of its pants, fueled by 1980s excess. It broke the rules in ways that more competent movies would replicate nearly a decade later. And whether you love that or you hate that, it carves out a legacy for a film that many just don't know what to do with. Stay cool, stay safe, wash your hands, make good choices, return your shopping carts, and I'll see you next time.
Oh, baby, let me love you till the morning glows me.